I'm a 34-year-old man, and I ghosted my 33-year-old fiancée after she suggested a temporary open relationship before our wedding, then cheated when I refused. I've rewritten this a few times to condense it, but our history is long, dating back to our childhood. I need advice on what to do when I get home in 2 days. I'll change all names, and I apologize for the length of this tale. Elara and I have been friends since childhood. Our parents were lifelong friends, so we grew up together and started dating in our teens. It seemed almost expected by our families. They had more plans for us than we did. When I pursued my master's degree, I moved to another city while Elara stayed in our hometown to complete her nursing degree. After a year of long distance, we decided to remain friends without the pressure of a relationship. We stayed best friends and dated other people, always knowing we'd end up back together someday. I graduated, stayed in the city where I got my master's, and started working in my field. I waited for a transfer back to my hometown and was thrilled when it came through. Elara was in a long-term relationship with a nice guy, but he seemed wary of our friendship. I respected that and stepped back, though Elara and I still talked a few times a year. My boss and mentor, Adrian, a 44-year-old man, was a great guy who taught me the ropes. One day, he approached me about an open position in a foreign city for 2 years. The money wasn't huge, but all expenses were covered, including rent and travel. The job was based in Tokyo, with occasional travel to other Asian cities. After consulting my friends and parents, I decided to go for it. Adrian said it was a challenging position, but a great opportunity to prove myself and climb the ladder. He recommended me, and I took the job, hoping to save most of my salary and gain valuable experience. The first year was tough, adjusting to the culture and social rules in Japan and other countries I visited for work. One thing that surprised me was how available women were. Everywhere I went, they loved foreigners. I had many friends with benefits, making it clear I wasn't interested in long-term commitments or marriage since I was only staying temporarily. I ended up staying for 2 more years. Adrian visited several times both for work and vacation, and we had some wild times in a few cities, like Angeles City in the Philippines. When the contract ended, I returned home and put a nice down payment on a house just outside the city. After living in a city of 37 million, I needed some space. A month later, while visiting my parents, I ran into Elara. She had broken up with her boyfriend a year ago, and we started talking more seriously. Even though we'd kept in touch over the years, we began dating again. I held off on having sex because I was afraid of what might happen. I'd developed an addiction to having various partners while in Asia and was trying to control that desire before getting serious with Elara. Everyone, including Elara, knew I had dated around, and there were occasional photos of me with different women on social media. My mother called me a playboy a few times, which stung a bit. Now, this is where things start to fall apart. Elara and I finally slept together, and she was surprised. She said I was different, more experienced. She asked me some questions, and I gave her a watered-down version of the truth. I didn't tell her the exact number of partners because even if divided by 3, it was still scary. I had no doubt I could be faithful to her, but the seed of doubt I inadvertently planted in her mind that night would cause serious issues later. Our families were thrilled we were together, as it was always meant to be. We were doing great, and after talking to her parents, I proposed. She moved in, and everything seemed perfect. There were some red flags, though, like her asking if I was happy with her. Fast forward to December 2023, with our wedding planned for July 2024. Christmas was wonderful, but just before New Year's, we hit our first major bump. I was working on my computer while Elara and her cousin Liana, a 32-year-old woman, were looking at wedding stuff. Elara asked to talk, and Liana went to the living room. Elara started by asking me not to interrupt or freak out. She said our differences in the bedroom made her worry I wouldn't be satisfied and might eventually cheat. She didn't want our future children and relationship to suffer if I strayed. I thought she was about to dump me, but then she asked if we could open the relationship so she could gain more experience and feel less insecure. She assured me I was the only man she'd ever loved, which is why none of her past relationships led to marriage. I agreed with her on that point, as I felt the same. I thought she was joking, but she was serious. This happened a year and a half ago, so I'll try my best to recall the main points. She assured me she would only hook up with random people, no one we knew or worked with. It would never be with the same person twice, and there would be no emotional connection. I was stunned, realizing she wasn't joking. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding in my throat. Normally, I'm not an angry or violent person, but I started yelling. I began to understand why Liana was nearby. I shouted, "Liana, did you put her up to this?" Liana responded that she was just there to support Elara. "Gee, thanks a lot." Elara then said I was free to do whatever I wanted, under the same rules. I was furious, and told her I didn't want one-night stands. I just wanted one person for the rest of my life. We argued for a while, and I told her if she went for an open marriage, our relationship would be over. I loved her and believed we could work through anything, but not this. I stormed off, grabbed my pillow, and went to the guest room. I could hear them talking downstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. It would have been a funny joke if it hadn't lasted for an hour. I didn't sleep at all that night and was a wreck at work the next day. Elara started 2 weeks of night shifts that day, so at least we wouldn't be home together, giving us both time to cool off. Every day there was dinner in the fridge with an "I love you" note, and she texted me frequently. I kept my responses short. The following Thursday, I noticed an email notification on her account. A hotel reservation at a nice hotel near my office. I knew the place well, as I often went there with coworkers. I wondered if she wanted to apologize and take me out for the night. The next morning, I waited for her text or call to invite me, but she only asked how my day was. Then she mentioned being happy she only had one more night shift. How did she have one more night shift in a hotel reservation? I was stressed and suspicious, so I started looking through dating sites, especially profiles without pictures, but found nothing. Adrian, my boss, noticed I was a mess and asked what was up. I told him the situation. Adrian, a tough guy who usually supported my relationship, suggested we go for lunch. I told him about the hotel. We went out, but I was too sick to eat or drink. Adrian said I could take as much leave as I needed, paid or unpaid. I told him I couldn't stay at my house anymore and wanted to believe it wasn't true. I rushed home, packed my stuff in my car, and went back to the office. Adrian suggested we stake out the hotel and wait for her to check in. I resisted, but needed to know the truth. We set up in the lounge bar, and I started drinking heavily. Around 6:30, Adrian tapped me on the shoulder, and there she was at the front desk, not in uniform. I wanted to scream, cry, and strangle her all at once. We waited 10 minutes after she got in the elevator, then approached the front desk. I asked to be connected to Elara's room. As soon as she answered, I started yelling. I told her it was over, the wedding was off, and our relationship was done. Then I hung up and left. I didn't know where to go, so I went back to Adrian's place. My phone was blowing up. The only person I called was my dad, explaining in a PG-rated way what happened and that I needed to leave town for a bit. It wasn't a discussion, and I felt bad for how I spoke to him. My phone didn't stop ringing for 2 days. Everyone called, but I didn't answer. I felt like I was walking underwater. Adrian advised me to handle some financial matters to protect myself. I hadn't even thought about that. House, wedding loans, car loans. We kept separate accounts for personal expenses, but had joint accounts for the wedding and house-related bills. I emailed Elara, saying it would be our last contact and that I was leaving the city for a while. I called my dad again, and while he was crushed, he understood I needed time and space. He still hoped we could work things out. 10 days later, I boarded a plane to Bali. I ignored all her messages and those from everyone else. I didn't care if she left the hotel that night or stayed. I landed in Bali and spent the next month drowning in alcohol, staying offline except for contacting my dad and work. I didn't care if I got fired. I wish I could say I enjoyed myself, but I was mostly drunk, filled with rage, shame, and hatred over how things went down. I kept in touch with Adrian about my leave. After 3 weeks, he asked if I could return to Tokyo to handle some work. We discussed the new project, and I mentioned possibly returning to Canada to settle things. I arrived in Tokyo on March 1st, feeling good to be back at work, even if only a little. I needed time to plan my next move. Those 30 to 60 days turned into another year in Japan. By then, I didn't really want to go home anymore. I rented out my house and kept in touch with family but refused any updates about Elara. On September 21st, I received news that my dad had a heart attack. He was doing well but needed a triple bypass. Although this surgery isn't as serious as it was 40 years ago, I still wanted to see him, just in case. I knew going home would turn into a mess, and I really didn't want that. I just wanted to see my folks and thank Adrian for all he'd done for me, despite my selfishness. I knew I'd have to face Elara, and I had no idea how I'd feel or react. Any advice, tips, or insults would be appreciated. I'm flying out in 4 hours and will land in about 24 hours. Update. After landing, I went straight to see my dad. He looked good and was actually looking forward to the surgery. Mom was doing well, but understandably concerned. I spent almost the first 24 hours by his side, talking about everything under the sun, but avoiding heavy topics to keep his stress low. I told him I was there for him, but also using this trip to reorganize my life, close some doors, and open new ones. On day 2, I met up with Adrian at a local spot near the office. Adrian was already a few drinks in. We talked about my dad, work, and then he asked if I'd had any contact with Elara. I said no. He informed me that the old man, the boss, wanted to see me, but considering my dad's situation, it could wait. Knowing I was in deep, I decided to get it over with. I had a list of things to accomplish this month, and meeting Elara was one of them. Walking into the office for the first time in what felt like forever, I noticed many familiar faces were gone, replaced by a few new ones. A few people nodded and greeted me. Adrian and I headed up to the old man's office. I had never been there before. We walked in and he motioned for us to sit. The old man started by saying, "Good morning, gentlemen. This is a closed meeting, and anything discussed is private, blah, blah, blah." He then went on a rant about responsibility and dedication. He had some good points, I had to admit. He looked at Adrian and asked why they should keep me around. Adrian said, "He does great work, he's saved accounts, and acquired many new ones. Plus, we can't find anyone to do the job for 20% below market salary, like we're paying him." What the heck? Then Adrian and the old man started laughing maniacally, like that bar scene in Goodfellas. The old man wiped away a tear and told Adrian that's why he's the best VP he has. I felt quite slighted. The old man looked at me and leaned in, saying, "Listen, kid, I know you had some problems with your woman, so let me give you some advice." He quoted someone, and while I don't remember the exact words, it went something like this: "God gives women eyebrows, and she plucks them out and draws on new ones. God gives a woman a face, and she paints on a new one over it. God gives her breasts, and she buys a push-up water bra. God gives her a form, and still not satisfied, she buys slim-fitting clothes to change that form. If God himself cannot please her, then how can you, brother? Please don't kill yourself over this." That blew my mind a bit. The old man then looked at Adrian and said, "I trust you to handle this properly. Your mother will kill me if I have to fire you." It hit me. They were related. Adrian and I walked out and I asked, 20% below market, really? He put his arm around me and said, "Don't worry about that. I've got you covered." I asked, "So am I getting fired or disciplined?" He replied, "No, dumbass, you're getting promoted." Then he kissed me on the side of the head, adding, "You could have told me that beforehand, you jerk." He laughed. "Nah, it was much funnier this way. I missed you, kid. Now let's go get drunk." It was 8:30 in the morning. "Adrian, who does that?" "I do. You still have a lot to learn about enjoying life," he said. This didn't surprise me, considering this is the guy who got drunk before on sake, got into a fistfight with a monkey, and got his ass kicked at the hot springs in Japan. We did end up getting drunk. We talked about work and what was going to happen. We also talked about Elara, and he advised me to meet her and get closure. He said we both did stupid things but are good people. Once I get closure, I can move forward without an emotional anchor holding me back. He said once that's resolved, we can talk about my future employment, what I want to do, and where I want to go. At least I still had a job, and my dad was looking good. But Elara was still on my mind. I unblocked her on Facebook and scrolled through her profile to prepare myself for what was coming. I sent her a PM asking if we could meet for dinner sometime soon. We exchanged pleasantries and agreed to meet for dinner in the next few days. That will be my next update. Elara and I met at a restaurant a few hours after she got off work. Going into this, I was afraid of two things: that my anger would linger and I'd act on it, or that my love for her would prevail and I'd act on that. I hoped to find a middle ground. All my plans flew out the window the moment she walked through the door. She looked wonderful, smiled, and walked over, making my stomach churn. I wasn't this nervous when we lost our virginity together. We shared a short, awkward hug, and I could smell my favorite perfume on her. Was she about to love bomb me or play some emotional tricks? Was she in another relationship and here to show me what I missed? No rings on her fingers, not even the one I gave her. We talked about my dad first. She told me she always checked in on him during her shifts and assured me his surgeon for the upcoming bypass was one of the best. We made small talk about her extreme workload. I was on the verge of cracking, but I kept calm and collected on the outside while falling apart inside. I told myself I needed this to consolidate my feelings and move on. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of dancing around the elephant in the room, she looked at me, and her face changed. The whole conversation after that is a blur, but I'll recount it to the best of my ability. First, she said, "I want to tell you how sorry I am for what happened and for hurting you." "Are you sorry you got caught? Or actually sorry for how you hurt me?" "Of course. I'm sorry for what it did to you, to our lives and our future. I threw it away because of my insecurity." "So did you plan it because of your insecurity? Or did you secretly want to punish me for the people I was with when we weren't a couple?" "Maybe both. But let me say that any other man who was in my life before we were engaged, I never loved like I loved you. Tobias, my ex before you, cheated on me because he said he could never compete with the feelings I had for you. We broke up for that reason. I didn't know this, and to be honest, I never felt bad that he cheated. I never wanted you to know I was going to sleep with another man. I thought I could emotionally detach from it, and even if you found out, we could work through it like everything else we experienced." "You thought very wrong. It was probably the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I didn't need you to be perfect or experienced. I just needed you to be mine. Every one of them, Elara, every single one, could never compare to what I felt with you. But now, I'm wondering if it was a real feeling or just the projection of the dream our families wanted, or the fantasy we expected." It started to get emotional, and Elara excused herself to the washroom to collect herself. We were in a medium-sized restaurant with only a few occupied tables. Adrian tagged along for support and strategically placed himself in the sealed-off lounge. I looked over for encouragement or a thumbs up, and he was having an animated conversation with two attractive ladies, laughing and gesturing wildly. He finally looked over and gave me a questioning thumbs up. When I nodded, he smiled, flipped me off with a smirk, and went back to his conversation. Elara came back and we resumed. She asked, "Is there anything you want to ask about that night? It can't be undone. It doesn't matter." "Nothing happened. I wasn't even sure if I could go through with it. When you called the room, it scared the crap out of me, and I raced down to the lobby, but you were already gone. It doesn't matter now. I'm not here to rehash the past. I want us to work on moving forward. Can you forgive me?" "Of course I can forgive you, and I do forgive you. You're not a horrible person. You just made a series of terrible choices that put us here. It's not all your fault. I should have been more understanding of your worries as well." I was cycling through emotions from love to anger to regret. Part of me wanted to yell at her, and another part wanted to take her home and pretend this never happened. For the past few weeks, I had been watching Reddit videos on YouTube, preparing myself for this conversation and seeing men punishing themselves for their significant other's actions. I was determined not to be that guy. I started looking at her, with the old man's words running through my mind. Painted face, painted nails, form-fitting dress. Do I even really know her? If this is her outward appearance, is her mind the same? Are all their minds the same? I hardened myself, reevaluated everything, and thought, what now? Is there anything in the future for us? I didn't see that future with Elara. I want you to remember when we were kids, walking home from the park, and that vicious dog approached us. I got in front of you instinctively to protect you. The owner called the dog and it took off. Just a few seconds. But when you're 9, that's pretty scary. All these years later, I stood in front of you, loving and protecting you from whatever came at us. But this time, when I stood in front of you, giving you everything I had, you stuck a knife in my back, just like the scorpion and the frog. This statement hit her hard. She lowered her head and sobbed a bit. I wasn't finished. I needed to get it all out. And I said, I'm sorry. She took out the ring box and slid it across the table to me. I left it there, and I continued. I don't want this. I'm pissed off. Do you think I want to be sitting here with my heart jumping out of my throat and you crying? I want to be home playing with the baby we would have by now." I can't remember what was said in the next few minutes. She began sobbing, holding her face in her hands. I've said some crappy things in my life, but that one took the cake. I apologized and said that went too far. It snapped me out of anger mode. After I vented, we had a normal conversation about life and the future. Because our parents are so close and her mom and dad are like my second family and vice versa, we discussed how we could coexist as friends. Reconciliation was not on the table. She got up to leave and we hugged for a long time.